This item was requested by Councilor Lachance, and just to go over what's in your book so you know what we have. First things included in the book, and this is rough, it has not yet been reviewed to make sure that everything is totally accurate as to how various parcels have been coded, is a map that shows the properties that the city owns, broken into a number of categories. The blue color is municipal buildings and facilities, green is conservation land, yellow is vacant, and purple is tax acquired with structures. There's also a listing in the agenda of all of the properties and their addresses, sometimes with a few notes. As I noted, this has not been fully reviewed yet, so there may be some coding errors, and there may be some properties that need to be adjusted as we go through it and take a more detailed look. Also in your packet, we have our current property disposition ordinance or policy, which outlines the process we use for disposing of properties. And in following up on Councilor Lachance's request, one of the things he's interested in is having a listing on our website of available properties. And the example that we pulled up here is from Milwaukee. And I just took a couple of pages from their website so you can get an example of how properties in some communities are listed in the website. A few years ago, and Dave can go in a little bit more background on this, we did a similar exercise where the planning board staff looked at all of the city's properties. Planning board then reviewed it to determine which ones they wanted to consider disposing of, and then the city put out a request for proposals on those properties. So Dave can tell you a little bit about that and how that process went and how long it took.
Yeah, I can't necessarily tell you how long it took, but it was back when Jim Bennett was here, and we went through a lot of the properties at that time, and we got rid of a lot of them for cheap at that time too, for better, for worse. But a lot of the properties that you have in front of you now, they're just not developed. They're not desirable. There's a reason the city has them, because people don't want to pay taxes on them because they're wet or they're backland or something like that. So depending on what the council chooses here, I think you folks are going to find, and the planning board as well, that a lot of these, I mean, potentially we could put them out to bid or see if people want to, are interested in them, but I'd be surprised. There's probably half of these are just, they're not developable. Either because, and one of the lists you have here shows that they're in land conservation already, so we wouldn't be able to do anything with them because maybe they're tied up with conservation easements or something like that from the city. But as you can see from your map, we added some layers on there with respect to floodplains and wetlands, and quite frankly, you just can't do anything with them, either because of DEP regulations, city regulations, things like that. When we went through that process, we did it twice in the early 2000s. The list that we provided, we basically, staff came up with a list of properties we recommend are potentially developable and ones that probably aren't. And then from that, the planning board kind of went through it and said, yep, we agree or we disagree, and that list was then forwarded to you folks for your consideration.
And that's the list we have right now.
Yeah, but to Ed's point, we haven't refined it yet at this point. This list was assembled through the GIS information, and I would say it's fairly accurate. I noted that there's some issues on it already that I tried to tweak before it came to you, but I think some things may be missing on it, like one clearing one on there, and I know why, is Mill 5. If you look at your map, there's 6 acres that isn't highlighted because that doesn't key in as the city of Lewiston. That's Lewiston Mill Redevelopment Corporation. So we searched based upon the city of Lewiston. And the other thing, I think, the perception I think that the public has, at least that's what I gather from being on the 3rd floor, is people think a lot of these sites that we're demoing are city-owned lots, and as you folks know, they're not. We don't own many of these at all because the banks continue to pay the taxes on them after we demolish them. So I think there's somewhat of a perception out there that a lot of lots are owned by us, and we do own a lot. I mean, you look at the map, there's a lot of little yellow squares in the downtown, but I'm not sure if it's to the extent that people really think. And at one point, sorry.
And there are clearly other potential house lots scattered around. For example, if you look at vacant city properties, 1 Acorn Lane, we actually tried to sell that once, got no offers on it. So it's still available if somebody wanted to buy it. We probably need to start thinking about, I think this is where Councilor Lachance is going, making that information more widely available so that if somebody is interested in that property, they can contact us. And there are some others, if you look at those individual lots that are scattered around, not just in the downtown area, but in a couple of other locations. And there are also a couple of, there's certainly at least one sizable parcel on the left-hand side of the map. You can see that big block out there. I'm assuming we got that as a tax-acquired property. And actually, it's a property that we, within the last few years, actually did some selective cutting on for timber. It does have access. There's a paper street that would access that lot. You know, and certainly those kinds of properties might be worth looking at, whether we want to retain them or sell them, and there are others scattered around. In some other areas, we have property, as David mentioned, that's basically swampland. It's either in the floodplain or wetlands. That stuff we've generally been looking at as potential for wetland mitigation elsewhere in the community. So if somebody wants to do some development, needs to mitigate that development if it's affecting a wetland, we look at some of these properties as potential for mitigating the wetland impacts. So,
and this, really the ultimate goal of this is to identify the properties where it makes sense that these are developable or they have potential for some kind of use, not the properties that the city owns that have existing city
Correct.
Infrastructure on them.
Correct.
We're not, I mean, that isn't the goal of this. The conservation areas, the properties that cannot be developed on, who knows if there's any potential use, probably not for that. So the primary idea, from my point of view, is the houses or residential lots, tax-acquired properties, whatever the method might have been for acquiring them, that the city has that are buildable and are developable, that could be utilized.
Right.
That's the focus, and that's really to the benefit of everybody to really get that out there.
Right.
The questionable properties, that's a little different. I do agree with the disposition ordinance, I think, needs to remain as it is. I don't think there's any intent to change that as far as the process.
Yeah, one of the disposition process does have one major drawback, and that is that it's fairly time-consuming and complex. And it's become more time-consuming, more complex as the process has gone forward with the way the planning board has started to approach these properties. I think historically the notion was, does the city need it or not? And the city doesn't need it, should get rid of it. But we're now often in a two-step process with the planning board, where they first look at whether the city should consider disposing of it, but then they'll condition it upon us coming back to the planning board with the details of the proposal, and they look at things like what's the proposed use, what's the financial offer that's being made, those kinds of things. So normally when we are looking at disposing of a property, we first come to you folks quietly and ask, are you interested in selling it or disposing of it? If you say yes, then we go to the planning board. The planning board will normally want to know, if we know then, what the intentions are. If we don't, they'll say, okay, well, we don't need the property for anything, we want you to come back with the details. And then they get into the issues of what are we being paid for it, who's buying it, what are they going to use it for. So it's slows down the process and complicates the process.
And at this time, anybody out there could inquire with the city and find out if we have a certain type of property. We would say, yes, we do, or no, we don't. They could say, oh, well, is that, are you accepting any kind of offer? And they could make an offer, and then this whole process begins.
Right.
At that point.
Well, normally what we do when somebody contacts us, expresses an interest, is we ask them to put it in writing, tell us what they're interested in. We don't necessarily ask them for an upfront offer, but that kicks off the process. We then review it at staff level. If there's no city need for the property, then we take it to you folks just to run it by and see if you're okay with us putting up. Then we go to the planning board. Then we put it out to bid. Then we go back to the planning board because they've usually put a condition on it, and then back to you folks. So
So I see a fork in the road that we could take with this. We could say, what are all the properties we own that are developable?
Right.
Whether they've been approved for disposition or not, and list those and leave it up to the public to get that ball rolling. Or we could say, let's run these properties by the planning board. Anything we already have that's set for disposition, put on the web. Otherwise, these other properties, we need to wait until that process is complete. What does staff prefer in that
I think
regard?
the cleanest thing would be to go through the planning board process and come up with a list of properties that the planning board does not feel we should retain. And then once we have that, we can decide how to proceed. Our normal process, we put it out for proposals, notify people, particularly abutters. I kind of like to do that when we can, if we don't have a really good offer coming forward independently, because that gives everybody a chance to become aware of it. If we get no proposals, then we can, my view is once we've done it once, everybody's had a shot, and if anybody comes along, we ought to be able to sell it to them. So,
And so I would still want to see staff recommendation on land banking in areas of the, well, in any area that they feel. So how do we make sure that we're getting that advice to not only the planning board, but also the council when the time comes?
well, I think one of the things that in reviewing these parcels that ought to be done is talking about, to some extent at least, what we want to see done with the property. I mean, if it's a single-family house lot in a residential neighborhood, we don't, we want a single-family home built there, or we want it added to the next-door property as an amenity to that property. If we're talking about, say the parcels on the riverfront, we might want to say, hey, these are available, but we want a proposal that meets our planning expectations. So,
And with regards to that angle, anybody can inquire about a property that the city currently owns.
yes,
It doesn't mean they're going to be able
Correct.
to make an offer. It doesn't mean they're going to be able to buy it or that they would even be interested in it, but they can inquire about it.
mm-hmm.
It would seem to me the primary purpose of this proposal is to simply put that information out there. So if someone is interested, they can inquire.
Mhm.
And it may be that that property has been reserved for some development or some project or some idea, and it isn't ready to be disposed of at this point. But I believe that giving that ability to the public to look and see what the city has on hand and make that inquiry on their own, I think that's the most beneficial thing for the public on this.
Right.
The process at that point, I think, really is what we have right now. That will remain. If there's a land banking idea or proposal on in order, and someone inquires about a piece of property that is involved in that, we can say, well, no, we're going to have to run this through because we have some ideas about what might be a best use for this property. I think that can be retained, but the ability to get the information out there, with the exception of conservation areas and undevelopable and city infrastructure, we don't need to,
Yeah,
to
and
worry
it's not,
about that.
it's not unusual for us even now, if somebody approaches us, to express to them what kind of project we would be interested in seeing on that property, and to see what their reaction is. If we have a nice piece of property, we'd like to say, let's just say it's that piece out on the left side of the map there, and what we're interested in is a residential development there. Somebody comes in, I'm going to say, well, what do you got in mind?
Yeah, and that's one of the
That becomes
benefits.
important in talking to both the potential purchaser and the council and the planning board.
Yeah, it's opening up a dialogue and allowing people to start that conversation with the city that they may not otherwise even know they can do, or that we would have a property that they might be interested in. So getting that communication and those lines open, I think, is really important to encouraging development downtown or anywhere in the town.
So, I really like this idea. I am wondering, and I may have asked this question before, if it's possible to take it one step further. In that, one of the things we hear from code is that in regards to a lot of the derelict properties downtown that we end up having to demolish, is that if somebody had gotten in there sooner, if the owners hadn't just walked away, and they hadn't sort of gone downhill because nobody was there taking care of them, that if we found somebody to rehab them, we could sort of revitalize these buildings over time. And so I'm wondering if you know of any cities who are doing sort of this kind of database for privately owned property where owners are sort of running into mortgage troubles, and then we could sort of get properties into the hands of people who wanted to rehab them before it's too late.
I'm actually not aware of anyone who's doing that. Most of the, for example, if you look at the big cities like Milwaukee, most of what they're showing there is tax-acquired property. So it's property that the municipality already owns. The difficulty when you start dealing with mortgage companies is that they have to be involved in the whole negotiating process if it's a short sale, and some of them are more responsive than others. So there's no guarantee on any individual property that the mortgage company and the property owner can come together and agree to how to proceed. You know, I don't know if you...
No, I don't think, my guess is the property owner would be thrilled if we did something
Right.
like that. They're not the ones that we have the problem with. It's
Right.
the bank that gonna have, I mean, if it was a local bank, maybe that'd be an easier thing to do. But I mean, we're dealing with, you know, Wells Fargo and places that are not anywhere here. They don't even know where Lewiston is. I mean, I guess we could reach out to them, but I mean, we reach out to them just to clean up the trash on a property.
Right.
You know, and it's a struggle.
I'll just throw out there, in the Mechanic Savings Bank, and their CEO is very interested in Lewiston and Auburn's property issues, and on their website, they actually have a clearinghouse for statewide bank-owned properties, and it's tied in with a number of other Maine-based banks. So I know that they're interested in this issue, and they've at least started with some online listings of bank-owned properties, so there might be some interest there with what we're trying to accomplish.
And on that note, it would be very easy to, in the case of Mechanic Savings, if they have that little portal on their website, to simply put a link on the city's website saying, go to Mechanic Savings, and here's a list of whatever they might have, or Wells Fargo, or whatever bank it might be.
So the only thing I'd like to add, one, we do have to kind of pay attention to staff time involved in all this, because I just foresee this as involving, unless we do it slowly, involving a lot of staff time. And I almost would like to make a suggestion that we go one step further on Councilor Lachance's thoughts. We should identify properties that we should just put on the market immediately. I mean, they're like the Acorn Place. You know, that's the type of property I think we shouldn't be. I'm not sure it needs to go on a website, hoping that we get proposals. I think we put it on the market, let the professionals actually market it and get the best dollar that we can.
Yeah, we have a number of parcels that's one that comes to mind. We also have 147 Sabatis and 11 Walker. We talked about 11 Walker last week. Those are already pre-approved to be disposed of. 147 Sabatis and 11 Walker, both people who had been interested in buying that backed out of the deals because all we were offering was municipal quitclaim deed on tax-acquired property. That means that they could not get bank financing because they did not have a warranty deed. We've gone through the process to clear the title on both of those properties, so they're now in a position where we can provide a warranty deed. So we're in the process of trying to deal with those properties. We can add one Acorn to it. I don't know that there's anything else that's recently been approved for sale that wasn't sold. We can check and see if we can identify if there are any other properties and get those moving forward again.
Those two large ones, we keep talking about one on the left, but there's one on the right. Where's that one on the right?
That's adjacent to the landfill.
That's anticipated for potential landfill expansion, so it probably should be
Anybody will
purple.
making any offers on that. Although there's nice views up there, there's no doubt.
It also has one,
Mountaintop property.
it basically, the only access to that property is through the other part of the landfill. There's no road access elsewhere, which is a real development limitation.
Then that long, narrow strip, kind of right in the center. Where is that? Yeah.
That's over there. That's off of, so this is
Webster?
Street right
Yep.
now. What's the name of those private streets there? It doesn't show up on this map. I should know that. Oh, East Cody Street. There's a bunch of wetlands in there. Actually, the schools looked at that repeatedly over the years as far subdivision in there, or maybe just one big house lot, yeah, there's potentially. But it's not as desirable as it looks on the map, given the constraints.
But I do believe a piece like that in the Realtor market we'd probably do okay versus just wait for someone to say, well, we'll take it off your hands for you.
Yeah, one of the things we might want to consider, and it is allowed for in our policy, I believe, I'd have to go back and check specifically, like One Acorn, where we put it out and get no proposal, is actually listing it with a realtor. That gets into the process of selecting the realtor. So we probably have to take proposals from real estate companies and see what percentage they wanted and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the simpler this is done, the better. If we get too complicated and too intricate
Right.
and too intermingled with a lot of other entities, then it really does become a laborious task to maintain this. The thinking with this proposal, I think we do have the two tracks. We can put everything we have that's developable, that isn't infrastructure or restricted, on there, and if someone wants to inquire, they can. Doesn't mean they're going to get anywhere. Or we can select through planning board or staff review or whatever the case might be, what properties are really things that we need to get rid of. And I think that might be the first decision that would be made for what we do with this idea. Regardless, I think we should put that out there because it is going to open up the dialogue with commercial type properties for development and other residential things, obviously.
Yeah, I think what I'd recommend is first we go through the process of just having staff review this and make sure we've got it correct and don't have anything miscoded. At that point, it seems to be we have a choice. We could either start putting stuff out there right away, or we could go through the planning board process and have them review these parcels and indicate which ones they support the city disposing of. So I'm going to leave that up to direction from you folks.
How many parcels right now are on this list that you've provided?
Vacant city properties, there's what,
80-some.
approximately
Yeah, that goes 80 something.
96, 97.
So are there properties on this list that are no-brainers? It's like, oh, obviously this, these are,
Yes.
Yeah,
there's no question.
when you look at the top, the very first column, it says vacant city properties, another one says resource, another one says municipal buildings.
So potentially this list can be pared down to just a select few of properties with questions.
Right, so I would say that the list that you have that's titled vacant city properties, that we can go through relatively easy and say, how developable of these 90-some odd properties, how developable are they?
Yeah.
Could be 80 of them, could be 60 of them, I'm not sure. I mean, part of it's frontage, part of it's lot size, different things like that. So that would be a relatively easy exercise if we're just focusing on that list, because I would agree with Councilor Lachance. I don't know why I gave you the list just so you saw all the properties that we own that have, other, buildings and facilities on them and whatnot. So it's really that last list that we would be looking at and figuring out what's actually available out there.
And then going forward, whenever I think we've pretty much started to do this, but whenever we acquire properties, we look at them as soon as we acquire them. So if we have a tax acquired property, we look at it as soon as we know as soon as you guys authorize us to accept ownership, often at the same time we'll request permission to dispose of it.
And in that regard, there would be some upfront time invested to set this up, hopefully not too much. But once it's there, it's
It should
simply
be
adding
easier.
on as it
Yeah.
goes, and that's pretty easy.
Should be easier once we get to that point, because we don't acquire that many properties in any given year.
What else?
So your preference is we start go through this at staff level, start putting stuff up on the website even before we go to the planning board, or do you want to go to the planning board?
I'd like to see a refined list first,
Okay,
me personally, and broken down into just a few categories. Marketable, things that are more that we're gonna offer to neighbors, butters, that type of stuff. Just a better breakdown, and then the ones that really we can't do anything with. And I think that list will get much smaller, and then I think we should have that next discussion of how we approach it. That's just my thoughts.
Okay?
And I think we need to be sure that and understand that we're not, this would not be done to say, these are the properties we're offering, these are the properties we own. I think there's a difference. And we could set up something where these are the properties that we've decided we want to sell to you, and you can call us and we'll talk, versus these are the properties we own that can be developed. There's a little bit of transparency and in allowing the public to know what the city has in these types of properties. Whether the planning board or the council or staff wants to sell those to developer A, B, or C with different ideas is a different question. And I think that isn't necessarily the function of this, because then you get into really delegating through the website what we're trying to do versus just putting it all out there and say, here's what the city has. If you're interested, you can inquire about it, but there's no guarantee that it's going to go anywhere. It depends on planning board, it depends on council, other projects. So do we want to have this strictly, here's what we're offering for sale, and we don't want to sell this house, but we want to sell this one, or we don't want to sell this property, but we have it, and we could sell it, but we've decided we want to hold on to it, or nobody wants to do anything with this, make us an offer. I think there's two different avenues we can go down with this. I'm of the mindset of put it all out there if it is developable, and that opens up a discussion. If someone sees this really enticing property, and there's one next to it, but they look at this one, they call us about this one, they didn't notice that one. We say, well, this is going through the planning board, it may not work out for you, but by the way, there's this property next to it that might work out better for you. We're not slamming the door, closing the door on anybody in that regard, and that's going to help the dialogue with developers and the city.
I think we do. Again, I'm willing, whatever the council prefers. One of the things that I'd suggest, at least on some of the properties, is that we might want to indicate, in some of the key properties, we might want to indicate some parameters. Like, for example, if it's in the Riverfront Island Master Plan, proposals should conform to what's anticipated to be developed as per the Riverfront Island Master Plan. If it's on Lisbon Street, we've got the lots next to the new statue. Basically say, we'd like to see development there that is congruent with existing urban development on Lisbon Street. Just give people a hint so that we don't get someone coming in and saying, well, I want to just turn it into a parking lot.
And the disposition process is intact. It still has to go through all the same channels that it goes through currently. And I think that's important. And I wouldn't want anybody to get the wrong impression that if it's on the website, it means you can buy it and if you make an offer, you will be approved. I mean, that isn't what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the dialogue open and get the talking going between developers in the city or potential homeowners or landowners.
To be clear, though, are you asking to still, if we go the route you're suggesting, to still have a refined list, though, of ones that we believe are developable versus, just say there's a 15-foot wide lot somewhere that we can't build, but maybe a butter is interested in it. Are we looking to limit it to developable lots per se, or?
Well, in that case, the example you gave is good because there's an abutter who might want that for some reason. We don't know. But obviously, land that isn't really practically developable in any way or has city infrastructure on it, those I don't think even need to be on the table. But that's one of those things. Staff can have their discussions and really whittle this down in a practical sense and say, look, this avenue isn't going to work. We really need to do it like this. I mean, that's what I would believe the council would like to see, something like that on a first step. Filter it and bring it back with what you really think is going to work most efficiently.
Council, Lachance, is the goal of this exercise just to get a list of developable lots, or is the goal of this exercise to purge our list of city-owned lots and get rid of lots?
I think yes and yes. I think that's two benefits. If we have
Staff is looking for us to give them direction. Do we want a list of developable lots, or do we want a list of developable lots and lots that we'd like to give to abutters?
Well,
Or
that's the
offer to
question, that's the
abutters?
question I just asked. And staff can look at this and say, you know, this isn't worth the time and investment for 10-foot lots or 5-foot slices of land. That isn't the real goal of this. If that turns out that that can be done easily, and it isn't a hindrance, I don't see a problem with it. But there may be problems in that. That isn't my original goal. I think the goal is to get the list out there so people can open up the lines of communication, have a dialogue, get things going, and have that discussion started. If at the same time we can do a few more things here and there, great, but that's not the primary focus.
So since we're doing this, I'd like to see lots that could be offered to abutters as well
Yeah,
as
that-
developable lots.
In fact, I would suggest going through this, that ought to be one of the things we're looking for, because we do have a specific procedure for that, which is to contact the abutters and see if they're interested.
And that's for lots that aren't developable?
Correct.
In general?
Correct. That's for lots that can't be developed, either because they don't meet the city's land use and zoning
So
requirements.
how long would you anticipate that it would take to refine the vacant land list? Ballpark,
I don't know.
couple months?
Oh,
Less.
no.
I'm trying to be generous.
Well, I mean, without interruptions, yeah. I mean, we can get it done in a heartbeat probably, but no, I mean, I could come back to you, you know, by the beginning of October. I mean, to be reasonable. I mean, it's just a matter of prioritizing it, to be honest with you.
Right.
I mean, it's just, where does it fall on the list of things to do?
So that doesn't extend this too long, and we'll have a much more refined list that we can look at and have a general idea of the benefits to the city and to the public. And I think once we refine the list, that'll reduce staff time of entering things on the website that truly, you know, either we don't want to get rid of or just would not be practical.
You know, the end goal of this ultimately is to get rid of a lot of properties the city has that the city doesn't need to have, that serves no purpose for the city having. That's the first goal, and to put that back out there in the private sector. At the same time, we're going to see a lot of things that we may not have been paying attention to. If someone sees something and they really like it, they can start talking with us and we can get something going, or not, but at least we're opening the doors with that. I think that's the ultimate goal. The city, you know, there's the land banking and the no land banking movements. This is really neither. It's putting the information out there. So the city can benefit, the public can benefit, the private sector, developers, homeowners, landowners, everybody. I see it's a win-win all around.
I certainly agree. I have no interest in keeping land that we have no purpose for. You know, I think in some instances we may have a purpose, and in that instance we can take a look at it and all, you know, continue to even make it available, but specify the kind of development we're looking for, like on Lisbon Street is a good example.
And it sounds like we'll wait until, when we bring this information back, we'll have the discussion as to whether that list goes forward to the planning board or if it's just something we post out there and let the process take its route, if I understand correctly.
Just a final note, in terms of staff time on the website, you know, I know we're all conscious of staff time on this project, but, you know, the lots that we're talking about offering to abutting properties, I don't know that that's a project that should go on the website. I think that's something that is done over the phone calls to abutting properties. Then in terms of developable lots, I think that's, you know, it's fine to put a listing on a website, but in terms of marketing on the website, I really think that's a task for real estate professionals. I don't think these are properties that are going to get traded on, you know,
I
as
would
good as
agree.
our city website is, I don't think that's where these
This,
deals
yeah,
are going to happen.
yeah, I would agree entirely with that.
And I'd like to think when we come back, I'll have a better idea of if we're talking
Right.
5 abutting or 50 abutters, you know. If it's 5, we'll take care of it.
Okay?
That it?
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.